Hang on. Welcome on in, everybody. It is another fresh stream from your pal, Ina Beta. That's me. I'm the brains of this operation. And this here is a little fat guy, little fat boy, hanging out on the cuddle throne, putting out them positive vibes, waiting oh so patiently for all the treats that are going to get tossed into his mouth tonight. And as always, we're here to talk about some neuroscience and psychology topics. This evening, definitely neuroscience. And also play some new games, old games, and favorite games. Tonight's more of a new game. We'll play some Magic the Gathering afterwards. So yeah, it's gonna be pretty dope. We'll chat just a little bit as people start filing in. Don't want to get started on the discussion of dopamine too early, before anybody's here. So we'll go ahead and just discuss how things are going. So I had a pretty awesome freaking weekend. It was pretty relaxing. Spent a lot of time coming up with the teaching portion of for this evening, and also for tomorrow, and worked some for Thursday's teaching portion as well. There's a lot that went into it, a lot more than I thought it would be. So, but I'm really happy with how things are going to go, and feeling really good about it. I think I'm going to cover a lot of information that I feel like is very important for people to know. Mainly, tonight, especially about dopamine, where it is in the brain, what it does for us, what type of neurotransmitter it is, and all that kind of thing, where it's made, where it goes to, what it does when it gets there, all that good stuff. Looking forward to talking all about that with everybody. It's gonna be basically dope. Basically, I hope all of you guys are doing well. I know this little guy was doing well. He spent a lot of time lounging in the sun this weekend, and buried under every single blanket that he could find. And now he's front and center, trying to spurn my advances, and waiting for those delicious, delicious treats. Again, that are no doubt going to be coming flying into his mouth soon. Just need people here to start the quest. Yeah, no? So. That's an idea for the future. Anyways. Yeah, so that happened. Anything else? No, not really. Wife and I spent a lot of time just hanging out, relaxing. She did a lot of work. I did a lot of work. Had some delicious Chipotle yesterday, which, as anybody that's listened to me talk about food for like 5 minutes knows that I freaking love Chipotle. So, got that going for us. That was freaking delicious. I can't wait to eat even more of that. Just saying. Does the word Chipotle actually show up in the yeah, it does, in the captioner. A lot of times the words don't translate, so just saying. Wanted to make sure. Let me double check real quick. This happens sometimes. I want to make sure that it's like actually showing on the channel that we are in fact live. Sometimes it don't. Just want to make sure real quick. Yep, we are. We're good. Cool, cool. Good stuff. Alright. Well, Viewbot, what's up, man? Good to see you. Just chilling and relaxing. It's live? Good. Just want to make sure. Couldn't tell. Can't always tell. I keep the viewer count off and stuff like that, and the viewer list doesn't really update and stuff like that, so just want to make sure. So like I said, I don't want to jump into the meat of our discussion for this evening and stuff like that until there's actually like people here to benefit from it, I already researched it and stuff over the weekend. I don't want to talk to myself about it. Just saying. If I can avoid it. But Viewbot, good to see you, man. How the heck was your weekend and stuff? Hope you're doing well. And Kavas, good to see you, friend. How you doing this evening? Hope you're doing well. Hope kitties are well. Hope your dad's well. Lay it all out there. Let me know, man. Yeah, the topic, if you guys couldn't tell from the title this evening, is dopamine. Y'all probably have heard of it before, right? What do you know about it? If you have the ability to let me know. I know some people listen while they're driving home and stuff like that, so yeah. What the heck y'all know about that? Tell me all about it. I'd love to hear about it. And if not, that's okay too. No worries. Doing okay, says Kavas. Kitties are doing right. Good. I'm sorry. Your phone is not doing you justice here. There we go. Dad's still in the hospital while waiting for the heart valve surgery. Got it. Glad he's doing well. I didn't realize he was still waiting. Gee, that sucks. He's been there for like a whole freaking week now. I would have thought that they'd be able to get him in over this last week, but I guess not. Also, Capture just decided not to pick that up, I guess. Yeah, I thought they would be able to get him in before now. That's butts. The freaking healthcare system. Doesn't even seem like it's just an America thing. That just seems like it's hospitals being busy kind of thing, you know? Having to wait around for a week for like a heart surgery. You'd think that they would kind of get that going, but if there's just not people to do it, there's just not people to do it, so. They had to clear the sepsis from his blood. Oh, got it. Which appears to be 100% gone. Now they're getting the doctors all lined up to do the surgery. Got it. Okay. I didn't realize that he was septic too. Yep. Makes total sense. It's going to be really hard to operate on a body part and have it heal properly when your blood is toxic or your blood is currently infected and your white blood cells are currently fighting a system-wide infection, which by the way is sepsis for those of you that didn't know. It's basically an infection in the blood and there's a big just system-wide immune system response that is trying to fight that off. So it makes sense to wait on a surgery till after that. Absolutely. Especially for older folk like I'm sure your dad is. Viewbot says this unit's been optimal. New ISP drops the connection slightly. Okay. Otherwise this unit was given a sharp and pointy object. Got you, man. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that the ISP ain't jerking you around too much and you're getting things worked out. I like it. That's good. I'm glad to hear you're doing well, man. I'm glad to hear it. Anyways, as people are filing in here, let's go ahead and get started talking all about dopamine this evening. Because I did a lot of I knew a lot about this already, of course, but I mean, I did a lot of research to kind of get together a good description of, all about this wonderful neurotransmitter in our body, what it's used for, what it, where it's at in our brain for the most part, what happens when it's not working in our brain properly, which, I mean, it's usually not a problem of dopamine not working properly, but your brain and body not able to utilize it properly, things like that, or there being too much or not enough of it, something like that. But let's jump into it. Oops, sorry. Now let's jump into it. There we go. My keyboard wasn't cooperating. So first, we've talked about this before. This is just a overview of the neuron and synapse. That's all. We're going to be talking a lot about neurons and synapses tonight, so I wanted to give us a little brief refresher course on that, right? And as always, this is intended to be an interactive discussion all about neuroscience this evening. So if you have information to add, any questions to ask, I mean, stop me at any time. Feel free to throw this in chat. I want that. I don't necessarily mean for this to be me monologuing the entire time. It's okay if it is that. But if people have things that they would like to add to the conversation about it, please do. It's meant to be in a conversational format, so go for it. You like a Viewbot? Yeah, I'm glad I got it working. I've been meaning to get the captions going for quite some time. So I'm glad that I finally got around to doing that, and it's working well. Picks up most of what I say just fine. Sometimes it just doesn't pick up sentences that I was saying like it did a second ago, but here we go. It is what it is, and I'm glad you like it, man. It's a whole accessibility thing. So this you might have noticed that I'm a member of a stream team now, and a member of that stream team is a member of the DHH community. She's profoundly, she has a profound hearing loss, so like she can turn it up as loud as she wants. She's probably still not going to be able to hear me speak, and so this is a accommodation that I meant to see it set up a long time ago, but that was more the impetus for me doing so, is that like, hey, now I actually know a person is a member of the DHH community who might actually be coming by, and if she wants to participate, I need to get these going. So I did that. Ooh, Viewbot says this unit did a bunch of work around Windows 10 accessibility. That's awesome, man. I'm glad you did that, because it's very important. I mean, computers being accessible to the handicapped, no matter what the handicap, is becoming more and more important for sure. What's up? AM Shagar says, your holy greatness does not approve of these satanic images and machinations. Blasphemy. Neuroscience? I'm guessing is what you're talking about. How'd that keep doing? Welcome back. Good to see you. I think it's a welcome back. You have a bit badge there, so I feel like you've been here before. But welcome in, AM Shagar. Good to see you. We're talking all about dopamine this evening eventually. We'll start that now. Ooh, Brimler, actually first we got a question. You have a 1K bit badge? It's true. I see it. That's what I thought. I just can't always remember everybody, you know? It's getting to that point. I swear I would never do that, but I mean, it's getting to that point where I just don't remember seeing everybody. Especially if they haven't been back for a while, you know? Brimler1421, welcome in first of all. Says, do you think dopamine runs gaming addiction? I mean, dopamine is the impetus for most addictions, actually. And we'll get into a little bit why that is later, but that drives most addictions, actually. So, been on an overnight job? Hey, no worries, Shagar. I'm glad I hope you're not still doing that unless you want to be doing it, and welcome on back. Good to see you, man. Redtacular with the longest dog ever seen. There's Rue emotes. No. Alpaca Snick 7. That's awesome, man. I like those. How you doing, Red? Good to see you. So Temp thinks you're jobless again? Oh, yeah, okay. I would assume that you'd rather continue working nights then, if that were the choice. There's a choice between working nights and not having a job. I assume you would choose the former. Yeah. So sorry. Hope you find a job for yourself soon, man. Little fat boy. Yeah, hopefully you'll be gainfully employed yet again soon, man. Anyways, let's get down to this dopamine research, yo. Oh my gosh, Red. You just woke up and you got 30 minutes of sleep. Sounds like you're good to go for the day, man. I hope you can get a little bit more sleep before your night is over, dude. I know you usually wake up pretty early in the morning and join us here, so thank you for that. It's always great to see you, man, but I hope you get some sleep too. We're researching dope. Lol. It's dopamine. There we go. The captioner may not be picking that up easily. Dope in you? No. Dopamine. Got him. Anyways, let's do this. So, we've talked about this on stream before. This is just a view of what a neuron looks like, right? Artist rendition. Not what they really look like, but here it is, right? Sounds good, Red. Sounds good, man. I hope you are. I hope you got enough energy for your day, dog. We talked about this before. There's the four essential, or what I consider the essential components of a neuron. You have the dendrites, which receive incoming chemical messengers from what would be the presynaptic neuron, right? All these little axon terminals connecting to the dendrites. Those are sending out their own neurotransmitters and connecting to and communicating with this neuron. We have the neuron cell body, or the soma, which is basically a lot like any other cell body on most cells. It's got the DNA and inside of its nucleus and all that stuff, the endoplasmic reticulum, it's got the mitochondria, all that business. And then all of those chemical signals coming in to the dendrites make small electrical charges inside of the soma, which gather here at the axon hillock, to eventually, when it reaches a certain threshold, and we're going to go over this more eventually, it fires that what's called an action potential, or a jolt of electricity down the axon, however long it might be, to these axon terminals, where those electrical charge, the electrical charge that got there, causes a release of synapses, or causes a release of neurotransmitters into what's called a synapse. Here's a synapse here, where some terminal or axon, sorry, I always call them terminal buttons. That's how I learned it. I'm going to try to stick with axon terminals. That's apparently the new hotness as far as that term goes. So here is a synapse right here, where axon terminal butts up to a dendritic spike. Here's a close-up of that. So when the action potential hits the end of this axon terminal, it causes these little vesicles that are full of neurotransmitters to bind to the cell wall, spill out their guts, and spill out all those neurotransmitters to bind with these receptor sites, and then be taken back up. That's a real quick run through of what we talked about before, about the neuron, and the synapses more especially. Because we're going to be talking all about synapses and stuff today. So the hillock is a capacitor? Sort of, yeah. I guess you think of it like that, because it stores up electrical charge and then releases it all in one big burst. Yeah, you can think of it like that. Especially with the all or none principle of action potentials, which says that you don't just kind of fire a small burst every once in a while. It either gets up to the point where it fires or it does nothing. So I guess you can kind of think of it like that. Sure. I hadn't thought of it that way before, Shagar, but that makes sense. Anyways, synapses. We're going to be talking about synapses tonight, specifically dopaminergic synapses, or synapses where there's dopamine being released, right? So first of all, a little bit more information about dopamine. Dopamine was actually discovered back all the way in 1958. You'd think a lot of this stuff is done like maybe in the last 20 years, but a lot of neuroscience has been done, over the last 100 years actually. But this specific neurotransmitter was found back in 1958, and the scientists that found it actually ended up getting the Nobel Peace Prize more recently in physiology or medicine for discovering it, and also how it relates to other neurotransmitters. So, well, fun fact, interesting stuff. Hey, no problem, Viewbot. Am Shagar says, I ain't too smart about this organic shit, I'm a machine. I mean, I'm a human that works on machines. It's okay. Everybody's got their own jams, you know, my jam happens to be the universe within. I love this stuff, so this is why I do this, because this isn't everybody's jam, but I believe very strongly that knowledge in this area, one, makes people smarter. It's good to know how the body works, especially the brain, and it can also help us to understand one another better. If we understand the brain chemistry and beliefs and all that stuff, and the way the brain works, the way the mind works, I think that does a lot to help us understand one another and our behaviors, and our and basically understand other people's behaviors and beliefs with a little less ignorance, a bit more compassion, more empathy, things like that. I truly believe that discussing these kinds of things and learning more about science and how we relate to one another improves that kind of thing. Everyday Gamer, what's up, man? Good to see you. How the heck you doing this evening? Tell me all about your weekend. Also, if anybody has anything great they want to share about their weekend, feel free to share it out. And if we need a break from the dopamine talk, we want to talk just about a random neuroscience question. Exclamation point NeuroQ will bring one up to talk about. Redtacular's jam is actual jam. Delicious. Jam is good. I like jam. I prefer jam to jelly. Anyway, so dopamine itself, I don't have a picture of it because you would just see a molecular diagram. Kind of doesn't really matter so much here. But dopamine is, we talked about this before, but because of a structure called the blood-brain barrier. Yo, Professor Malco says, this is dope. Got him. I love it, dude. Welcome on in, man. We're just about to talk a little bit about the synthesis of dopamine, so if you got any chemistry insights to share on that, Professor Melko, go for it. Love to hear it. Friend Professor Melko is another member of the Knowledge Fellowship, a group of edu-streamers. He's a legitimate professor of chemistry, so if you need to bone up on your chemistry or just want to know a little bit more about it, feel free to go check him out sometime. He's good people. Everyday Gamers, the weekend said the weekend was pretty normal. The D&D was the most eventful moment. Just working on some online stuff lately. Cool. Overslept majorly today. I wish I could have. Mrs. Beta was up early, which means I was up early. And she also stayed up late, which means I stayed up late. Because we live in a small house and it's hard to stay quiet, I suppose. So, of course, Prof. No problem, man. I like it. Hey, my wife is too, Am Shagar. She's all about that culinary chemistry. She loves it. Yeah, I was supposed to go play D&D on Sunday, but something came up and I wasn't able to go, unfortunately. We'll finish our campaign next time. All right. So, dopamine, like I said, I don't have a picture of it because it would just be a molecular diagram and it's whatever. But it's synthesized from a couple of different things because of this structure we talked about before. It's called the blood-brain barrier, right? Which says it's basically just a network of really tightly packed glial cells around our blood vessels in our brain, or most of the blood vessels in our brain. We're actually going to talk about a part of our brain tonight that isn't completely covered by the blood-brain barrier, and there is some permeability. But yeah, because of the blood-brain barrier, dopamine, there's actually dopamine in a lot of the food that we eat, but it can't get into our brain to act as a neurotransmitter there. A lot of it just kind of floats around in our blood and made inert by the liver, sorry. I think either by the liver or something else, some other enzymatic process attaches a couple of different atoms of sulfur to it, makes it dopamine disulfide, and it doesn't do anything anymore. It's just totally inert and it gets excreted eventually and whatever. So the dopamine that we eat doesn't really do anything for us, but there's a precursor to dopamine called phenylalanine, and that is what we would call an essential nutrient, which means that we need to eat it from food. We have to get it from food. We can't make it in our own bodies. So we need to eat foods that are rich in it. And that can get into our brain. And once that's taken into our brain from there, as we can see on this diagram, well, actually can't see this first step, but phenylalanine is turned into what's called L-tyrosine, or just tyrosine. And then that, through another enzymatic process, is turned into another precursor called L-dopa. These two, I believe, can also pass through the blood-brain barrier. L-dopa is one that is often given in treatment of another disorder we'll talk later, but this one This one can go through the blood-brain barrier too, and then through another enzymatic process, boom, you got dopamine here in the axon terminal of this presynaptic neuron. And that's how it's made, right? You take in phenylalanine via food, and then your body uses a couple different enzymatic processes to turn it into tyrosine, then L-dopa, and then dopamine proper inside the brain. And that's that. Let me catch up on the chat a little bit. I like it, Red Professor of Coffee. Got PhD in it, dog. Ham Shaker says, food brings everyone together. It's true. Don't care about culture or opinion. Unless you got an eating disorder. Then you might shy away a bit. But hey, you know, this still go to the meal for the social aspect, I would think. Damn, liver limiting my dopamine. But again, you don't need it, right? You just need to worry about phenylalanine getting into your brain, and then your brain will make all you need. No worries. No worries. What's up, Taxdu? Welcome on in, man. Good to see you. How the heck you doing? L-dopa, great Spanish reaction. I love it. I have to use that one on Nina when she's here. Yeah, welcome on in, Taxdu. Hope you're doing well. Hope the family's doing well. Thanks for being here this evening, dude. Hey, thanks for the host, Melko. Appreciate you, man. You're already here. Yeah, so that's how dopamine is synthesized in our the different cells in our body, right? Or in our brain, rather. I would imagine that the dopamine is actually synthesized outside the brain too, and I would imagine that the process is very similar, right? So so when we make dopamine in our brain, we kind of just make as much as we need to signal postsynaptic neurons, right? That's what it's for. It's a neurotransmitter, as we talked about with synapses before, right? When there's an action potential in a cell, the electrical charge that ends up here at the axon terminals causes vesicles to bind or to meld into the cell wall here and release those neurotransmitters that it's holding. One of those is often dopamine. So dopamine gets released out into the synapse here, which isn't just like a free open space here. It's usually wrapped up in some glial cells to keep it in like a nice enclosed space. And it will so the dopamine will kind of fly across the gap here and will bind with these receptor sites briefly, and then will be unbind, and then is usually reuptaken into the presynaptic neuron. So they'll usually send out those neurotransmitters, do what they got to do, and then they take them back after that. Hey, thanks for the follow. Appreciate you. That's how that works. They get sent out, they bring them back, right? And they get reused ad nauseum. They usually just get reused until there's a signal that says, hey, we don't need as much dopamine as we got. We're going to break some down. So when that happens, dopamine inside the terminal button will interact with this thing, MAO, which stands for monoamine oxidase. Turns it into dopa-C, gets excreted, binds to another receptor called COM-T, and turns into homovanillic acid, which doesn't really do a lot in the brain. That is able to pass through the blood-brain barrier again. It's seen as a waste product. It goes out into the blood and then is excreted from the body. Doesn't really do much in our system, but it is used for an indicator of how much dopamine you got flowing through your brain, right? Because if there is an amount of homovanillic acid, then there must be some dopamine in there. So they'll often take a blood sample from a person if they want to check dopamine levels and look for homovanillic acid and see what you got, right? So you might have heard of MAO, or monoamine oxidase. If you've heard of antidepressants that are monoamine oxidase inhibitors, you've heard of this. If the action of monoamine oxidase is inhibited, then that means less dopamine is going to be broken down, and there's going to be more dopamine in your system overall, right? I believe that there are some what's the word I'm looking for? Antidepressants that work that way, and I think I want to say there's also some drugs for ADHD or attention that also work that way as well. But I'm not sure about that. Don't quote me on that. But there are medications that are called monoamine oxidase inhibitors, and they're going to increase the amount of dopamine in your brain, right? Let me catch up on the chat a little bit. Is homovanillic acid vanilla flavored? I don't know. I'm not sure. I never had it before. Redtacular says the LMAO chemical responsible for all the LOL receptors. Got him. I love it. Oh yeah, Bada also is showing us one of the new deals we got since the comeback from hiatus and the rebrand. Want to strengthen the neural net as our connection with each other. So everybody, when there's a brand new sub, for the first time ever, not resubs, but a brand new sub, first time ever, and I'll be sure to let you know because I'll recognize them. If you give them at least 500 BDNF with the give command, which is your channel currency, right? You get entered in a drawing for a $5 Steam card each week. I'll be giving that on Friday during our gaming sessions. So keep it in mind. Let's show that generosity. Let's show that positivity. Let's make those connections with people. Let's make them feel welcome, you know? Professor Melkus says it's fascinating, crazy that us humans have figured all this out. It's true. And I gotta say, the more that you see how much we've figured out, or at least that we think we've figured out, the more there's that many more questions. You know, the rabbit hole goes ever deeper, it seems, but it's amazing that we're this far down it. I agree. Gemini said I need to start taking an LMAO, a reuptake inhibitor, for sure. So does the band. Also, welcome in, Gemini. Good to see you, friend. How you doing? How the heck are you, man? I'm glad you're here. So yeah, that's basically how dopamine is synthesized in our body. We need that essential nutrient phenylalanine goes through these enzymatic steps to become dopamine, because dopamine can't cross through the blood-brain barrier, so it needs to be assembled on site. After it's done doing its job and we need less dopamine in our cells, monoamine oxidase will break it down, and it's broken down further into homophenolic acid and out of the system. We're done. Good, nice tunes. Glad you like it, man. Yeah. And I feel like I didn't realize last week, but the sound level was too loud, so I feel like I got it just right now. So, next up, let's see. Did I talk about that? Yeah, I did talk about that. I talked about reuptake and stuff like that. Yep. Okay. So dopamine, a lot like other transmitters, they bind to the surface receptors on cells, right? Whether that be in the brain or outside the central nervous system, around the body and stuff like that. Sound levels are good. Glad to hear it. I'm glad. Like last time I was barely audible over them. I didn't realize it. Oh yeah. So, like I said, dopamine is a neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitters bind to receptor sites, usually on neural cells, usually on neurons, but not always. Sometimes throughout the body. Later when we talk about muscles and stuff like that, and neural innervation of muscles, we'll be talking about a more specific neuron that acts more in the peripheral nervous system than in the central, as far as I know. So there's different receptor sites that dopamine can bind to, and there's actually 5 different ones. There's actually 6 different ones, but we're only going to talk about 5 today. 5 of them are more specific to dopamine. Like I said, there's 5 of them. There's D1 and D5. Those are primarily excitatory ones. When a molecule of dopamine binds to a D1 and D1 or D5 receptor, it causes the cell inside of it to increase the amount of what's called C-amp, or cyclic amine monophosphate. That's it. Cyclic amine monophosphate. No, adenosine monophosphate. That's the one. Cyclic adenosine monophosphate. And that is used to just basically get work done in the cell. It ramps up its activity and makes it function more, right? When dopamine binds to a 2, 3, or 4 receptor, 2, 3, or 4? Let me double check that. I'm gonna check my notes here. Yep. When it binds to a 2, 3, or 4 receptor on the postsynaptic neuron, or a 2 or 3 receptor on the presynaptic neuron, it's going to cause an overall reduction in activity in that cell. It's going to cause C-amp to be produced less, and it's going to cause a reduction of activity in that cell, right? So D1 and D5 are excitatory, and D2, 3, and 4 tend to be inhibitory, right? So you might notice that these are both on postsynaptic neurons, but there's also this little pathway that goes back, and there's a receptor site on the presynaptic neuron. Basically what this little loop here is going to be doing is, if there's a bunch of dopamine out here in the synapse, and there's like too much, some of the dopamine is going to bind with this receptor site and send a signal back to the presynaptic neuron and say, hey, quit making so much freaking dopamine, there's too much out here, like chill it out. And it'll cause some of the dopamine to be broken down. It's going to slow production of it, and that's one of the mechanisms that your body and your neurons use to regulate themselves, right? So those are the different types of receptor sites that there are. Only 5, and there's two different functions for them: excitatory, inhibitory. D1 and D5 excitatory, D2, 3, 4, those are mostly inhibitory. D1 is by far the most common one, I believe. Yeah, D1 is by far the most common type of dopamine receptor in the system. So dopamine, for the most part, by way of there being that many receptors, primarily ramps systems up. Dopamine itself isn't an excitatory molecule, but the fact that there's so many of those excitatory neurotransmitters or neurotransmitter receptor sites says that that's going to be its primary action. And there's far less D2 and other ones after that. Viewbot says, so the dopamine receptors are named D1 through 5. Are serotonin ones named S1 through 5 and oxytocin's 1 through 5? There's actually more than 5 serotonin receptors. There's something like 12. So, but they are numbered like that. Yeah. And oxytocin, I don't know yet. I'm not sure about that one. I didn't learn about that one as much when I was in school. I'll be reviewing that. Hey, thanks for the follow. Appreciate you. Bots shouldn't have problems with the long words, though. It's true, Tax do. They shouldn't. Gemini said it's a complicated process, so it's not just about how much dopamine you have. Nope. But not having enough is definitely present in many types of neurological dysfunction. Yep, we're going to be talking about that later. Is dopamine linked to general well-being? It depends. It depends on the overall levels of things in your brain. Generally, having a good balance of all your necessary neurotransmitters where they're supposed to be in your brains results in well-being, for sure. I would say that monoamine oxidase inhibitors aren't prescribed as often as antidepressants as SSRIs are, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. That tends to be the one that's the ones that are given more. Yeah. So I would say that any one neurotransmitter is linked with overall well-being. It depends on how much there is where in the brain, right? Exactly, Gemini. Yeah. Yep. Whoa, indeed. But yeah, Gemini hit it right on the head. That's exactly right. Yep. Depends on where things are and how much there is. And oh, I almost forgot. We're talking all about this picture, but I didn't give credit yet. Whoopsies. So this picture was made by old Smedib. Smedib, I think, is the name here. And his original work is based on Pankrat. I don't really know those two artists, but they made this. It's up on Wikipedia. Here is the web address right there. You can feel free to go check it out. It's freely available. So just using it as a teaching term, and I doubt anybody would mind that. So that's where we at. Okay, we talked about that. Yep, dopamine's not necessarily excitatory, but it depends on where the receptor sites are and in which parts of the brain, for sure. TOS! Right, yeah. I always want to make sure to give credit. Don't let me forget. I should just do that in the beginning. Yeah, I should just do that. I'm going to do that before I forget again. There's that one. This one is open. And it's public domain, so we don't need to worry about it. This one... Let me turn me off. Don't type something in there. Reload that picture. Okay, there we go. This one was made by NRETS, put up on Wikipedia. Again, I got all these pictures from Wikipedia because they have a lot of these that are usually in Creative Commons. You just got to give attribution, and that's what I want to do. Made by NRETS. Here is the link to it. That's that. And then this one is public domain, so we're good to go. We'll be talking. Those are the pictures we'll be using tonight to discuss this. So, you good at that? Hey, I just try to cover all my bases, Professor. You know. Red says, I'm baffled that the brain and the human body in general is as well mapped as it is. We are indeed curious boys, for sure. Like I was saying earlier, before some of you guys got here, dopamine itself was discovered back in 1958. You would think this stuff was done maybe in the last 20 years or so, but nope. Dopamine's been known of since 58. The guy that discovered it got the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine, I think in the early 2000s. So yeah, for his work on that, but it's been around for a long time. Vbot says, do you think it's possible to self-force neurotransmitters to process actions when applying stimuli like music? What do you mean? I need more information about that. Like increasing their activity for a short period of time to create a physical reaction like excitement, goosebumps. Oh, you mean, we've talked about that phenomenon before. Those are called aesthetic chills. I don't know the neurophysiological correlate of that. I don't know what action in our brain is making those chills happen. But it is widely known that some people, when they listen to music or see something profound or something like that, that can cause those aesthetic chills. I'm not sure if it's forcing neurotransmitters to do anything. Usually forcing of neurotransmitters isn't needed. The chemical gradients and the way that they travel back and forth in your brain is set up well enough. You don't have to worry about forcing anything. But yeah, like I said, the mechanism behind that isn't necessarily well known, and not everybody gets aesthetic chills either. So that says something too, you know. Anyways, so inside the brain, dopamine does a lot of different stuff. It plays roles in executive functioning up in the frontal lobe, motor control in the more in the midbrain, motivation and arousal, and also reinforcement and reward, all midbrain stuff. We're going to talk about these specific pathways in just a minute. So also, let's see, there's also lower level functioning like in lactation and sexual gratification, and also nausea. There's a spot in the brainstem that's responsible for that. We'll talk about that in a minute. So yeah, now we're going to move into, I believe, yep, the different pathways. So we'll talk about, oh yeah, here's just another picture of a synapse. Okay, I should have looked at this earlier actually, but here's another picture of a synapse, just in case we didn't have a good description of what that looked like earlier. But so axon terminal, electrical charge from the action potential comes down, causes these voltage gated calcium 2 channels to open, allows in some calcium 2 plus, which causes these vesicles to bind to the cell wall, open up, spill out neurotransmitters. They do their job, they come on back, and that's that. That's that. Research keyword added, aesthetic chills, do it. So just another picture of how a synapse works. That's it. This one isn't specific to neurons. This is a more general picture of what a synapse between two neurons would look like. Gemini said, I researched that a while back. Basically, it's triggered by the sympathetic nervous system. It is. Which causes effects like chills, goosebumps, increases heart rate. Yeah. The goosebumps are caused by kind of like a little bit of vasoconstriction or change in vasodilation is what that would be. So if it's the sympathetic nervous system, it's vasodilation and blood kind of being pulled away from your skin and into your blood vessels to your more important parts. Sympathetic nervous system is strongly linked with emotional response. That's why some people get chills from stuff like music or touch, indeed. So it's not, yeah, exactly. It's not understood why some people get it and some people don't. It's true. I just don't know that yet. It's also not, I would think, a super huge area of concern to research either, so it's not surprising that that's not, oh, I forgot water. It's not surprising that's not been well researched. In my opinion, not surprising. Anyways, so dopamine producing neurons are actually pretty sparsely spread throughout the brain. There's kind of two main areas that make dopamine. One is the substantia nigra right here, which stands for the black substance. If you were to crack open a brain and look, though, it's not actually black. I don't know why it got named the substantia nigra, but here it is. It's actually saying nigra, right? Okay, that works. Good. Just want to make sure I didn't think about that before. So yeah, there's that area, and also this area called the ventral tegmental area. One of the pathways we'll talk about first sends dopamine made in the substantia nigra up to this area called the dorsal striatum. Right, the striatum is a midbrain structure mainly responsible for initiating and controlling movement. More specifically, gross motor movement, but also fine motor movement too. And let's see, we talk about that. So yeah, I said these neurons project up to the dorsal striatum and provide dopamine for that to use. And this helps modulate motor inhibition, actually. So this is more responsible for inhibiting movement or starting movement by inhibiting inhibitory neurons that are stopping you from moving. Motor movement, I know, right? Gross. And also motor planning for future reward acquisition, right? So this is what's responsible for like starting purposeful movement. It's a long roundabout way of saying this area is responsible for helping us start to move when we want to move for a purpose, right? And this pathway is called the nigrostriatal pathway. That's it. No, not stop saying negro. No, nigrostriatal pathway. Ooh, that's not good. That's not what it means. When your aesthetic chills are on fleek, got them. So yeah, that's that one. And I want to say that word as little as possible because of the captions. That's not what I'm saying. So That's that area. We're going to talk about this a lot more in a bit when we get to disorders of dopamine. So the ventral tegmental area also projects to two different areas. One here called the nucleus accumbens, or the ventral striatum, and also projects up into the prefrontal cortex, kind of all over it. The prefrontal cortex uses a lot of different, a lot of dopamine for sure. So it goes to the frontal cortex via what's called the mesocortical pathway, because it's going from the midbrain, or the mesosphere, I believe. Yeah. Mesencephalon, that's the one. Mesencephalon up to the frontal cortex, this cortical area. So mesocortical pathway. And there's also goes to the nucleus accumbens, or the ventral striatum, to the mesolimbic pathway. This is a part of the limbic system, or an emotional and motivational processing area in the middle of the brain called the limbic system. So these projections here are responsible for, what did I write down? Sorry, I don't have this all memorized just yet. These play a role in reward seeking and acquiring behaviors, right? It's not necessarily for reward, like we don't feel, this isn't what makes us feel the reward. It's more, this is what causes us to go out and get things that we know are rewarding based on past experience, right? This makes us focus on it. This makes us move towards it. This makes us act towards it, right? And this is the part we were talking about earlier that has a lot to do with addiction. The nucleus accumbens and the whole limbic system and stuff like that, that causes us to become addicted to things. Not just gaming, not just gambling. Oh, maybe V-Bot wasn't saying that. Somebody else was. But this is that area that causes that, right? And the neurotransmitter that's part of that system that's responsible for it, right? That's where addiction comes from. Is kind of a haywiring of the system, or overactivity in the system. Let's see. Dopamine producing neurons is also in the hypothalamus, which isn't shown here unfortunately, but there's also dopamine producing neurons in the hypothalamus. Sorry, I have some word finding problems sometimes. They're finding the hypothalamus, which is responsible for our endocrine system, which is kind of the release of hormones and bodily state functions, stuff like that. So the projections here go from here to other endocrine-related parts of the brain, like the pituitary gland and stuff like that. They control a variety of functions related to sexual development, right? There's also one more. Did I not write that down? Why would I not do that? Oh, we'll get there later. It's there. Ethanol's here. What's up, man? Good to see you. V-Boss says, Ainabata lost the staring contest. Sorry. I lose words sometimes, guys. No, not the most fluent speaker. I'm better in writing. Ethanol said, so I ordered a new PC case, a new keyboard, and a new mouse that were supposed to be delivered today. Stuff all arrived in your town today. Amazon told you it'd be delivered today, but I never got it. It won't get it till Thursday now because of post is canceled tomorrow. That's butts. What the heck? Why do heck? I would blame the shipping service itself. Sounds like it's not Amazon, but UPS or USPS or whatever they sent it with. That's butts, my friend. I'm sorry to hear that. Hopefully you get that soon. Until then, enjoy talking about dopamine with us. So, overall, dopamine causes kind of the initiation of action that builds up reward association, right? So it causes us to do things that we have seen are previously rewarding to us, and it makes us focus on those things that we know are have been previously rewarding for us. It motivates us to go get those things, right? Losing words just fine? Totally. Don't need perfection, just my face. Thanks, Fred. Appreciate you, dude. That's heartening. I hear you, Ethanol. I hope they get there on Thursday for sure. They're telling you that, because they told you something else today too. Hope it works out for you, dude. So they build up reward association, like I said, and taking action to get those rewards. So when it's released following an action, right? When dopamine's released after an action, the brain interprets as rewarding, such as eating or having sex or doing drugs sometimes, or acquiring something material, or any number of things, anything that we might interpret as rewarding, right? This system, the mesolimbic pathway right here, and also I guess by a way of, in a roundabout way, also the nigrostriatal pathway also. That makes us that that reward association. So in the future, we're more likely to do that same thing. I've said before that there's a part of our brain that kind of makes us do the same things over and over again, kind of no matter what. And this is it. This is that system that says, hey, you did that thing before. It worked out okay. Do it again. Hey, here's that situation again. Do that same thing again, right? You get those rewarding things. This worked out for us before. Keep doing those things, right? And if you think about it, that kind of ties back into evolution, because they're like, hey, you ate and it felt good. Keep eating, stupid. If we didn't get the satiety from eating, we may not do it as much, Or like, that's the reason why, sexual, like why intercourse feels so good. Like, we're supposed to do that. That's kind of the end goal of life. Like, go do that, That's why we're hyper focused on that a lot of times. Or like, hey, keeping ourselves, or putting there, I don't know, any number of those associations will help us survive and thrive as a species, Oh, you guys get federal workers get off tomorrow? What's tomorrow? What am I missing out on? Viba says, so if dopamine addiction is triggered by sleeping, we can reward ourselves with more sleep. You could. If for some reason you get addicted to sleeping, sure. I don't know if that's something you can be addicted to, but hey, why not? I don't know. But anyways, yeah, like I said, this makes this whole system kind of makes it more likely to do those rewarding things in the future, right? When we're presented with those same opportunities. So dopamine is kind of related to the wanting of things, but not necessarily like it's kind of related to liking things. If you think of it separately, like there's when something, like when we're going to do an action, there's a wanting to it, and there's also an afterwards a liking to it, right? Dopamine is kind of related to the liking of things, like the actual reward feeling, but that's not really what it's about. It's more strongly related to wanting it and driving you to go get that thing that's been previously wanted and liked before, right? So in the case of, like I said, drug abuse and addictive behaviors, it's this dopamine that's building up this cycle of us wanting to pursue the action in question, whether it be gambling or drugs or whatever, or eating. If you have an eating disorder, you want to eat too much. Like, this is the system that's making you focus on that and driving you to do it, making it like really hard not to do it. That's focusing everything you have on it, right? It's the dopamine system. It drives your attention to those things that have been rewarding in the past and really causes you to do what you need to get it, right? And this happens even when the liking of a substance decreases. So like a lot of drug addicts will not like the drug nearly as much in the future, or they'll even know like, I need to stop this, but I freaking can't. A lot of drug addicts will, they'll always talk about trying to get back to that first time they used the drug, when the response in the brain was new and it was the strongest response it was going to be. But then after that, your brain kind of starts to change neurochemically and neurophysiologically, and it's going to have a less and less, I guess, robust response to that drug, So you start to physically enjoy that drug less and less, but your dopamine system is going to keep you getting that thing because it's like, hey, that was rewarding. Go freaking get it, Also known as tolerance, Gemini. Exactly. An executive order was made to let you guys off for George Bush's funeral. Oh, okay, got it. George Bush Senior, Redtacular. Not GW, but the senior. Yep. Got it. Don Starlight, welcome in, friend. Yeah, talking about that brain chemistry, talking all about dopamine this evening. How you doing this evening? Hope you're doing well. So yeah, that's kind of how that works. So it's this system that's makes us focus on those things that we want, and there's that insatiable, like, oh, I can't get my mind off of this thing that I want. Like, this is the culprit. This is what's making you do it, right? And that's his job. It's supposed to make you get after stuff that you've done before that was pleasurable, because that's generally seen as good for you. Usually, a lot of times it's seen as good for you. Or, your brain naturally wants you to seek out pleasure and avoid pain. So this is going to cause you to focus on those good things, Stock markets are closed too. Makes sense. Don Starlight had to take a motor learning and control class. That was pretty confusing. Oh, interesting. I don't know as much about that. I'm looking forward to learning about it and teaching it here. So yeah, like I said, the striatum, or these areas that the substantia nigra and the ventral tegmental area project to, these can be thought of as an area that just make us do things we've done before over and over again, right? So there's another area. So open one of the tabs open. Yep, Nani. That's the one. That's the one. That's the original one that I saw, and the best one if I do say so myself. There's one more area that is important for dopamine to act on. It's called the area postrema. It's back here, down here in the brainstem, right? It's a pretty important area. This is one of the few areas of the central nervous system, or for those of you that don't know, the brain and the spinal cord, that's the central nervous system. It's all bound up in the, what we talked about before, the blood-brain barrier, right? But the area postrema here in the brainstem is actually one of the areas that's not fully wrapped up in the blood-brain barrier, and there is some permeability between the blood in our system and the blood supply in our brain, right? Normally, the blood-brain barrier keeps those two systems very separate, right? Only certain things can activate gate proteins within the blood vessels of the brain and allow themselves in, right? But this area is a bit more permeable, and for a good reason. It's like that too because it monitors toxin levels in our blood. So it kind of needs to have a sampling of the blood in our system in order to do that, right? So if there is, if it detects certain toxins in our blood, a lot of different stuff will set this off. Usually just things being out of balance in general. You can get it from drinking too much of things that are actually considered good for you. You can get it from, drugs and stuff like that too. But if there is stuff in your blood that's really not supposed to be there, or too much of a concentration of something that's normally supposed to be there, this is what initiates you throwing up, right? And you might notice this is down in the brainstem. That's where a lot of our more basic functions are. So like, throwing up when we have too much of something in our system is a more basic and involuntary thing. And that's kind of driven by, this is fed by dopamine as well. So, hey, no problem, Gemini. It's all good. We'll see you next time, man. It's all good. This will be up on a VOD if you want to catch the rest of it. No worries, dude. Take it easy. Good to see you for a bit. Redtaculus has got to be honest, blood-brain barrier sounds like a shield out of Bloodborne. It kind of does. It kind of does. Red, thanks for that farewell for Gemini. I appreciate that, man. The blood-brain barrier kind of does sound like something that should be in Bloodborne. I mean, amygdala's in there. That's a part of the brain, right? And I'm not really sure if that's supposed to be pronounced amygdala or amygdala. I don't know. I say amygdala. Let's see. So yeah, that's, like I said, that's an area of our brain that also relies on dopamine. And so a lot of times if you take medicines that increase or sharply increase the amount of dopamine in your system, one of the major side effects is going to be vomiting. And that's why, because this also gets ramped up by dopamine's action. If this gets too excited or is stimulated too much, it's going to cause you to throw up, right? Which makes it kind of difficult for a disorder we'll talk a little bit more about later. So yeah, those medications that do that increase dopamine in your system are called agonists, dopamine agonists. What sounds like the word agony, it actually has kind of a totally different connotation. An agonist of something, especially a neurotransmitter, is something that makes your system produce more of it, right? So yeah, dopamine. There are certain dopamine agonists, like oh gosh, I believe Ritalin and amphetamine, what they were prescribed for ADHD. Those are agonists. There's also the opposite of that would be antagonists, which would make your system kind of depress the levels of that, or depress the your system's ability to be sensitive to that, right? So monoamine oxidase inhibitors would be a dopamine antagonist because it would kind of lower the overall amount of dopamine available in your brain, right? So that's that. All right, so like I said, dopamine is produced outside and also used outside the central nervous system as well. I don't have a picture for that, but you can imagine, the bloodstream and the rest of your body and stuff like that. So dopamine is located pretty strongly in the immune system, where actually it plays an inhibitory function there. Kind of inhibits your immune system from working if it doesn't need to be, right? It kind of holds it back. It also goes in what are called the nephrons of your kidneys. The nephrons are the functional unit of your kidneys. For those of you that don't know, your kidneys are responsible for filtering waste out of your blood. It's kind of the secondary filter after the liver. The liver is the primary filter for sure. Usually what's broken down, or the byproducts of something being broken down in the liver, that's excreted through the kidneys, right? The kidneys don't really break down stuff as much as they do just kind of filter it out. The liver is what breaks things down. So the dopamine acts in the nephrons of your kidneys, or where that filtering occurs, and it increases blood flow and stuff like that, and also sodium excretion, which is a very important thing for our body to manage, how much sodium's in it, right? I was actually watching a video earlier today about a woman that drank an entire liter of freaking soy sauce and ended up with permanent brain damage because it damaged her brain. Having too much salt in her system caused a lot of water to be sucked out of more vital areas and stuff like that, and just really messed with her brain. So yeah, I don't know how she managed to get that down without throwing up all over the place, but she did it. And she's now never the same, because she had too much sodium in her bloodstream, which would be termed hyperkalemia in medicine speak. So yeah, lower any more brain stuff? Yep, all the time. Random letters. I did dial it back though, because preparing for a lot of this stuff is too much, I think, to do 4 nights a week. So I went back to 3 nights a week for this week, and I'm considering dialing it back to 2 nights a week actually, because this, like I said, this is just a lot to prepare for. But indeed, random letters, this is kind of what I want a lot of my content to be about. I want to be able to teach this kind of stuff and make this a focus of the stream. So, you know, welcome on in. Good to see you, random letters. Kyle, good to see you, friend. How you doing? Welcome on in. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well, dude. All right. So like I was saying, dopamine's used outside the central nervous system, used to kind of inhibit the action of your immune system. Also increases filtration and blood flow and sodium excretion in your kidneys. Let's see. Also used in the pancreas, where it kind of affects the chemical processes inside and outside of the pancreas. Yeah, so either secretion of hormones, insulin, into the bloodstream, or also into the lining of our intestines, where where the pancreas apparently keeps that up too. It keeps up the mucus lining of our stomach, of our intestines, and I didn't realize that. So it affects both of those as well, right? Ever watch Fringe? Something tells me I might enjoy it. I think I have watched Fringe. Can't remember now, but I might enjoy that, yeah. What's up, man? Playing Pokemon on the couch with your wife? Nice, dude. While you watch Property Brothers? Ah, dude, that show's pretty darn decent. This guy's got a good program going on. So, that's a lot about dopamine, but there's more. So, dopamine production and receptor site proliferation, or how many receptor sites there are throughout these important areas of our brain where dopamine acts on, right? That kind of naturally decreases with old age, just like our body and our brain in general kind of atrophy and become less as we get older in old age, right? So not only does it happen with dopamine, but it happens with receptor sites and neurotransmitter levels for a lot of different neurotransmitters, right? So kind of how it works. So dopamine actually plays a huge role in a disorder you probably heard of called Parkinson's disease, right? Y'all probably heard of that before. Muhammad Ali had it. Presumably still does have it. I don't know if he's with us or not still, but he's got it. Michael J. Fox still has it and stuff like that. It's not going anywhere. It's kind of a long-term thing, never really goes away. And the interesting thing about the two of them is they got it very, very young. That doesn't normally happen. But normally it's something that happens in older folk. What happens is dopamine production in the substantia nigra starts to this gets damaged or just kind of atrophies very quickly, and it stops producing enough dopamine to properly supply the dorsal striatum. So you get the features of Parkinson's that we've seen, right? You have trouble starting, what's the word I'm looking for? Starting voluntary movement, right? So if you've seen somebody with Parkinson's, I've seen it, but if you've ever seen somebody with Parkinson's go to start a movement, you'll notice that they can't really, they have some trouble doing it. They might have to try a couple times and then they can do it. If they wanted to reach their arm out, or if they want to stand up, they'll try and then they can stand up. It takes them a bit, because the signal simply isn't getting to their dorsal striatum. They're like, hey, get up. There isn't enough dopamine to signal the initiation of that action. It's not like they don't want to, or it's not like their muscles are weak or something like that. they're fully capable of getting up or moving their arm. It's just like the signals aren't getting there, right? And then like I said, it's due to a deterioration in the substantia nigra, which lowers overall dopamine supply to the dorsal striatum, right? Also, you get the other features of Parkinson's. You get that shuffling gait that they have. They'll take like very small shuffling steps, which is why a lot of people with Parkinson's end up falling a lot, because they aren't nearly as stable when they walk that way. Your body's designed to take those larger steps and stuff like that. But if your body doesn't get those signals to take normal steps, you get little tiny steps instead. They also tend to have what are called masked facies, which is a weird term for this, but they basically just have like kind of like a droopy, like not very expressive expression, and they have a very mumbly speech pattern and stuff like this. So, because their face and their vocal fold, or their speech musculature, is also not getting those the signals properly to move as much as they're supposed to. So you just kind of basically get like weakened, like blunted motor response system-wide, and that's where you get those difficulties from. Also, the striatum is involved in starting movement, but it's also involved in inhibiting movement. So you might notice, like, normally if you hold your hands up, they're pretty still, right? But if in a person with Parkinson's, like, their hands would kind of always be shaking a little bit. They would have what's called tremor at rest, and especially noticeable in the extremities like this. Like, their hands would kind of always be shaking around a little bit, right? And it's not like they're tired or they're cold or anything. Like, they can't hold their hands still anymore. And it's a neurological thing. It's not due to muscle weakness or anything like that. So those are kind of the hallmark symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And again, it's all caused by a difficulty with this dopamine pathway, the nigrostriatal pathway, right? So, like I said, Muhammad Ali had this, right? So he got it, like, actually when he was very, very young. He started showing signs purportedly before the end of his boxing career, actually, but he wasn't in the ring, like, with Parkinson's. You can't be, you get knocked out really quick, but he started showing signs of it. There's evidence that after his fights and stuff like that, he was talking, a good percentage slower and, with less volume and stuff like that than he normally would speak, like before matches or in his normal life and stuff like that. And that was kind of like seen as the onset of Parkinson's earlier on. And one thing I didn't mention yet is these specific areas here, especially the substantia nigra, those are especially prone to damage, let's say, right? They're very, very easily damaged, whether by chemical means or by getting punched in the head a lot, like Muhammad Ali did over the course of his career. He got punched a lot, and this is something that happened to him. Now he has Parkinson's. He developed it pretty early on too because of that, His midbrain got really, really severely damaged, and that's one of the things that happened, And it happens a lot in other professions too, like football players will get this kind of stuff. Not always due to concussions even, but just by getting their head hit so many times over the course of their career. One of the things they can end up with is early onset Parkinson's, as well as a whole host of other neurological disorders and stuff like that. It depends on where the damage is for a person and stuff like that, but this is one of the things that can happen, is early onset Parkinson's. I don't know how it developed in Michael J. Fox, but that's one of the things that's kind of how Muhammad Ali's, or it's very likely that's how Muhammad Ali's developed, was just his boxing career. He was very, very good at it, but still over time, if you keep getting punched in the head, that's one of the things that can develop. That's one of the reasons why I don't watch sports like that, like boxing or MMA or things, or football, or really heavy contact sports, is because, people are free to do it and free to watch it and stuff like that, but I don't want to provide viewership to that kind of thing, because people really do injure themselves very early in their life because of that, J. Fox went Back to the Future one too many times. No. That was a good one, Red. No worries. That's okay. Yeah, that's why I choose not to watch those kind of sports, because, like, this kind of stuff happens to the fighters, and like they aren't really well taken care of after that, especially if they didn't save what money they got, or if they never really made any money off of it. They just aren't taken care of in the future, and they really burn out their brains really soon, or really early on in their careers, or can anyways, and they're left in the care of other people after that, you know? So something else that I wanted to talk about was, oh yeah, so some of the ways that they can treat Parkinson's is if we go back to this picture of our dopaminergic neuron or synapse here, we see this precursor to dopamine called L-dopa, right? This is something that we can synthesize outside the body, and does pass through the brain-blood barrier. And this is something they'll actually prescribe to people that have Parkinson's, right? If their body isn't making enough dopamine anymore, well, let's put some more dopamine in, right? They put in some L-dopa, that gets into your blood-brain barrier, that gets into your cells, they make that into dopamine, and boom, a lot of the difficulties from Parkinson's are alleviated. But you end up with some other difficulties that go along with that. So one of them being is it causes a lot of nausea because of this area postrema that we talked about earlier. If you raise brain-wide levels of dopamine, this is going to be stimulated too, and it's going to cause a lot of nausea, right? That's one of the first and foremost side effects that you get. Because the medications that we prescribe for these kind of things that act in the brain, they aren't super targeted, you know? We can't say, okay, we want to raise Parkinson's levels just here. We can't do that, you know? The main way that we get medications around our bodies is in the bloodstream, and so that's going to affect everywhere. So if we raise dopamine in one area, we typically raise it in all areas of the brain. It doesn't just happen in one place. And so you get a lot of nausea with taking those medications. Another thing that you get is you'll get what's called, sometimes I believe you get what's called pill rolling, or like you'll just constantly be kind of like moving your fingers around, stuff like that, because like your ability to kind of inhibit motor movement is even more pronounced now. People that take this kind of medications, Parkinson's patients will develop things like that with their fingers. They'll also develop different kinds of tics and movements, and vocalizations and stuff like that sometimes. And maybe you guys know, but like there's another disorder that sounds a lot like that. Anybody have a guess? What is it? What other neurological disorder does that sound like? If 8Bucks takes Parkinson's drugs, okay. Hey, Pancakes, what's up, my man? Session-long kitty cam brought to you by our friend Choco Chip Pancakes. Thank you for being a part of the neural net and connecting with us for 5 months, my friend. Good to see you, man. How you doing? Welcome on in, man. We're just here talking all about dopamine and how it affects us and such. If 8Bucks says, I have restless everything, can't even sleep. Yep. Having too much dopamine will do that. Hey, Ash the Smurf coming in to the neural net for 4 months. Appreciate you, Ash. Welcome on back to us. Thanks for connecting with us again. Appreciate you, Ash. How the heck you guys doing today? How was your weekends and stuff? And how you guys doing? Hope you're well. I'm doing well. Doing well. You guys are on the same day, it's true. Ain't gotta be. I'm saying y'all can stagger it if you want. But yeah, another thing that increasing the amount of dopamine in your system can cause is restless leg syndrome. Sometimes if there's too much, overnight you can get what's called restless leg syndrome. It's usually where you're just kind of kicking and moving your legs all night, and because of that you wake up exhausted like you didn't even really sleep because you've been burning calories and working your legs out all night when you should have been laying still, right? So this is a lot of the things that can happen in your brain when you take dopamine supplements for Parkinson's. You get these different side effects. It's hard to manage those symptoms too. But yeah, I was before our awesome subs we had, I was saying when a person that has Parkinson's takes these drugs to increase dopamine in their system, they might sometimes develop like motor or vocal tics, right? And that sounds a lot like a disorder called Tourette syndrome, right? The exact like etiology of, or like kind of what's going on in the brain that makes Tourette syndrome a thing isn't really known specifically yet, as far as I know, but it sounds like, and there's evidence for this, that increase or too much dopamine in your system can cause that. So that's kind of, so yeah, It seems like too much dopamine, you end up with vocal tics, things like that, and sometimes in certain cases schizophrenia. But that's shaky research too. And if you have too little dopamine in your system, you can end up with things like Parkinson's, right? And also, so what happens if there's too little dopamine in this area? If there's too little dopamine going to your frontal lobes, you end up with ADHD, right? So your inability to kind of focus your attention where you want it to, inability to kind of inhibit paying attention to things in your environment that don't matter, right? Just basically overall inability to pay attention and focus your attention like you mean to, right? So that's caused by too little dopamine going to the frontal lobes along the mesocortical pathway that we talked about earlier, right? So things they'll often prescribe for that, Ritalin, amphetamine, things like that raise or stimulate this area to produce more dopamine or stimulate these areas indirectly, right? A lot of times people say like, oh, Ritalin and amphetamines, those are uppers. Like, you don't want to give a hyper like kid that can't pay attention uppers. Like, well, you actually do. Because you're raising dopamine in these areas, you're stimulating these areas more, which is allowing that to make it so you can focus your attention more like you're supposed to be able to, right? So I mean, it seems counterintuitive to give a hyper child and typically child, a hyper person that can't focus their attention properly, an upper. You would think that would make it harder for them to pay attention, but it actually has the opposite effect because, as we talked about earlier, it all depends on if you have the right concentrations of dopamine in the right places in the brain. Too little here or too much here, you get Parkinson's or probably Tourette's, respectively. Too little here, you end up with ADHD, right? So it's all about just managing those levels and keeping them in the right spots, hopefully. Fats is sleeping? He sure is. He's a good boy. I'm not giving you a treat yet, buddy. Surprisingly, there hasn't been a quest for you yet, Fats. People have been too enraptured learning about the brain. I forgot all about the questions. But let's see. Is there anything else there? Yeah, that's that. Quest. There's a quest. All right. Actually, I was incorrect earlier. I said restless leg syndrome was because of too much dopamine. No. Low amounts of dopamine is actually what is associated with restless leg syndrome and stuff like that. So if you're very restless, you might have too little dopamine in your system, and increasing your dopamine reserves might help to make you a little less restless, right? That's all. Subtle? Sure am. Sometimes I am. So now a little bit more of my experience with Parkinson's. Parkinson's is kind of like the main dopamine thing, that and ADHD. But there's actually treatments for Parkinson's in getting around the gross motor movements and walking and stuff like that, and also voice therapy, right? I learned about these as a speech therapist. And these don't use medications. Basically what these are designed around is basically doing everything bigger, right? The LSV the program is called LSVT, or stands for Lee Silverman Voice Therapy. And there's LSVT loud and there's LSVT big, right? LSVT loud is the voice part. LSVT big is the physical therapy, or like the part designed around getting you to walk better, right? And basically what these, like very, very, very basically what these therapies focus on is training a person to initiate movements bigger and louder, right? So that, because research has shown actually that a person with Parkinson's, like if they're under duress, like they'll move and act like a normal person would. Like they won't have trouble moving around or anything like that. If there's a big sensation for them to move, or if they're really trying to run, or if they're really trying to yell something, like they don't sound much different actually. So if you train a person like, hey, every time you open your mouth and you're going to say something, you need to say it like focus on saying it loud, Focus on almost yelling it. You don't want to teach a patient to yell because that'll like kind of burn out their vocal folds, but focus on saying it really loud, And after trying that and getting it to where it's kind of second nature for them, they end up with like a pretty functional and normal voice actually. And same thing with the LSVT big, instead of them, starting out to walk like they normally do and getting like the little shuffle gait that the person with Parkinson's would normally have. Instead, you teach them like, hey, take like really giant, pretend like you're going to take a giant step, and you kind of hone that process until where they actually start taking more normal sized steps. They're more stable, they're much less risk of falling and stuff like that, and they're able to get around more easily on their own. So those are two types of therapy for Parkinson's that don't require medication, right? It's interesting stuff in my opinion. When you're watching mobile and get a phone call, is dopamine the neurotransmitter that helps say, I've done something good, where's my reward? Sort of, Ash. We were talking about this earlier, actually, this pathway here. The the mesolimbic, there we go, the mesolimbic pathway helps us to focus on things that we know are rewarding based on past experience, and helps initiate movement to go after them and get them. So it helps us in the wanting of something and the initiation of going to get that stimulus, right? So if we see things we want and we kind of can't get our mind off of it, that system's the culprit. That's the one that's making you hyper focus on it, making you take all the steps to go get that rewarding thing, right? I've said before on stream, like, there's a part of our brain that makes it so that we just kind of want to do things we've done before, no matter what. And this is that area of the brain. This is the one that makes us focus on those things we've liked before. Just do that thing again, do that thing again, do that thing again. And that's kind of how drug addiction works, you know? Our brain really likes illicit drugs, which is why they're so rewarding, and your brain's going to have a really hard time focusing on anything else if it's available, or until a long time has passed and you can kind of get away from it a little bit, you know? Yeah. So that's kind of what it is. It helps motivate you to get rewarding things, but not necessarily feel that reward. It helps us like rewarding things a little bit, but it's not its primary action. It's more for motivating you to go get those things. As I see, you guys took out Muse Tavish, the Scottish Fold Highlander, which means Little Fat Boy gets a treat. Y'all get some kitty cam. Thank you guys for questing yet again for Fat Boy's Fat Belly Fund. Dedicated to keeping him the fattest kitty on Twitch. He appreciates it. I appreciate it. Y'all love it. It's a win-win-win. Captioner, pick up my voice, dang it. Thank you. What a good boy. It's Fat Boy's first treat of the evening. He freaking loves it. Alright guys, and that was the dopamine chat. Thought that would last longer. Maybe I moved through it too quickly. I don't know. Well, that was that. He was ready for that treat. He's been waiting. Before streaming, like, he was sitting here, like, you guys didn't hear it obviously because we hadn't started yet, but he was sitting here just like meowing at me like so much and like pawing my shoulder like, Dad, make with the treats. He was really excited for them. Anyways, yeah, that is the dopamine talk for the evening. I'm sure we'll touch on this subject again. We'll talk about other neurotransmitters and their effects and stuff like that in the future, but that is dopamine. So for now, I need to grab some water because I didn't grab any. I forgot to bring it in with me before stream, so I'm thirsty, and my voice is feeling it. We're also going to switch over to some Magic the Gathering, and we're going to play that. But yeah, that's all going to happen in just a few minutes. I'm going to take a little break, go say hi to the wife and stuff like that, maybe grab a little snack, and we're going to switch over to Magic the Gathering. So stick around, don't take off yet. We'll be right back in just a few minutes, okay?